Hello, everyone. Great to see you again. Um, so, as we talked last time on the payment, I think it is time to go back to the main billing topics, and one of the most important one, I think, it is around rate. So today we'll just start with rate. Okay, I think if you look at those videos on the billing topics, you probably know the life cycle, how a bill is created, and there are algorithms to add bill message, doing validation, etc. Um, so I think if you remember during the life cycle of the bill, after we get consumption from MDM, uh, and after that we will once the bill is created, it will trigger all the validation algorithms, post processing algorithm, etc. Um, but in between, what actually happens with the MDM consumption and how the bill get generated. This is actually what the rate is doing at that time. So today, I was probably just talk on a very high level what rate actually does, what rate actually covers, how it looks like, and we take one scenario today to look at how we can construct a rate for to resolve a particular billing requirement. And at the very end, we look at the entities involved as well. Overview. Okay, so the service agreement can be configured to apply rate, and uh, and the rates will basically calculate the bill segment lines, and the rates contain the rules that control the content of each line's description, the method used to calculate each line's value, and also where the GL it distribute to. Um, Also, rate schedules, effective date, calculation rules are stored in a rate version. So on a very high level, we have rate schedule. Is what we actually call a rate. And for each rate schedule, you have different versions. And with version, we each version would have a set of rate components. Okay, so this is the kind of structure of how rate is constructed. So over here we're talking about in each rate version, we have at least one. Sorry, for every rate schedule, we have at least one rate version. Multiple rate version exist when something about the rate changes, about the rules changes and applicable to the billing period. So um, at the same time, you could only have one rate version applicable to the service agreement. So service agreement understands which set of rate components underneath the rate version to be applied when billing kick off. Okay, and last, a rate version's rate component contains how to calculate a line's charge, how the line's charges are reflecting GL, and if and how a line is printed. Um, Rate component is very powerful, and I think in this series, I mainly would just talk about the old version. So actually, there are two different versions of rate schedule the rating engine. Um, I probably just carry on with the rate component version because that's probably easier to explain, and that's actually a lot of the utility has been using. The new version is a little bit different, but I won't say it's too different. It's more Java application, sorry, Java based algorithms. A lot of the functionality can be expanded. So, but old and the new version, they are more or less doing the same thing. It's just the new version is more expandable. Okay, second we'll look at the rate elements. Right, so remember I was saying the rate component is the main um, configuration point in a rate because that each of the rate component is basically one rule to define to calculate a charge. For example, charge, cost, price, etc. Over here, the price per unit, percentage, or flat charge is an important part of a rate component. This amount can be explicitly declared on a rate component. Alternatively, the rate component can refer to a bill factor. Besides rate component, bill factor is also a big name in the CCMB billing. Bill factor is something holds the value. Okay, it holds value and it can contain value for different scenarios, dynamically applied at billing time. We will look at bill factor a bit later in more details, but just remember rate component, bill factor, these are the two big names in rating. Okay, and then there are different types of rate components. SQ rate component apply a price to a service quantity. Um, yeah, so service quantity, I'm not quite sure if you are familiar with that. When you look at the bill, you always see there's a section, say service quantity. Service quantity is more like let's say value, calculated value at runtime, or retrieved from a characteristic, retrieved from service agreement, for example. Um, but they are actually like a runtime variables within a rate engine, so they can be calculated to be the price on the bill, or it could be calculated to be used by other calculations. So service quantity is a fundamental part of how the variable works in the billing rating calculation. And service quantity, I think I did mention about this in the measuring component as well. It's very similar to how the measuring component type are identified, which is the UM, TOU plus SQI. Okay, so unit measure uh, time of use plus the service quantity identifier. So these three uh, they identify the service quantity during the billing as well, during the rate calculation as well. Okay, second type is apply to. So basically, that apply percentage to a value calculated in other rate component. Another one is the summary, which summarize a set of calculated values. So these are very often used, I think, in most of the projects. But there are other types which I've listed here, like item type rate components, interval pricing, and TOU pricing, flat charge rate, component, minimum max, exact charge rate, or you can call algorithm which outputs a value to which is a way to extend the logic if the calculation is quite complicated. Okay, so these are the types, different rate component types. For each of the rate components can uh, optionally have rules that control if it's skipped or applied, which is called eligibility criteria. Okay. Now, so here are some common configuration points for the rate component. Now, if you have worked on the rates, you probably be familiar with this, but I want to highlight some of these ones, which I think it will make well, in every configuration for array components, you will actually need to consider these aspects. Okay, so the first thing is it controls if and how the line is printed. Now, not every array component means a line generating in the bill. Okay, so there are calculations in between, which basically is just a calculation for a kind of temporary variable to be held, or it's used for informational only. It doesn't have to go onto the bill. So those ones you don't have to tick the box saying to be printed. Um, if the line is printed, you must also provide a description, which is a dynamic um, string, and with a lot of substitutes can be used, and there are various rules on that, and that is quite interesting because it does provide a lot of functionalities to take value from various places. Um, so, but what you need to remember is the string is not fixed. It can be dynamically constructed. By default, the lines are not printed if they are zero, but you can override the default by turning on. Okay, that's an option to be chosen. Secondly is the seasonal charge. So for some of the charges, you don't apply to season. Um, in the project I've been working on, we don't use that very often because most of the case in UK it's around TOU pricing, and so when you talk about TOU pricing, normally so seasonal charge up need to work together with the seasonal settings in the admin menu, but not many projects actually use that. Uh, if you work on projects using time of use components, normally that means it's a potentially a characteristic somewhere, and that will be a service quantity type of rule. So yeah, this is an option, but not very often used. Now the third one is for calculation purpose only. As I mentioned in the print option, there are lines which doesn't need to be printed, doesn't impact the GL, so they are actually for calculation only because those values might be used by another rate component, or it was just the informational only. So yeah, so this is quite important feature, and it's quite often used just to let you understand, not all the lines are printed on the bill, and this is one of the very important reason. Rounding, you can define whether it's round up, round down, or normal, which is nearest. And also you can define the precision of the rounding. GL account we talk about for the lines to be printed, to be distributed to the GL. You define the distribution code used for used to construct the GL account. Last one, but it's very important one, which is called characteristic. So remember on the billing, when we talk about the bill segment generate the calculation lines, each calculation line item has a characteristic. Okay, so these characteristics are very important because uh, over here I'm saying it's additional information for reporting, but also they can be used for additional information for printing. Okay, not just the reporting purpose, but also printing. It's not explicit, but for some of the um, complex scenarios, you do need a place to extend those information. And where is the best place to extend that? Characteristics. Because characteristic is many to one relationship. So for each line, you can have as many as characteristics possible, and it's easier to identify by the code. Okay, yeah, we talk about the bill factor. I think, yeah, bill factor is a very, very important concept. You see that everywhere in CCMV implementation related to bills. Bill factor overall, I mean, on a very high level, in my world, it's basically just a factor to hold the price. Okay, but over here I put something bold because I think it is very, very important, and that actually explains how flexible it is. So all the bill factor has the capacity to have different values depending on a characteristic of person, account, service agreement, premise, or service point. So when you define a bill factor, you can define generic values. Let's say, okay, you have a bill factor. For tax, um, the rate is 5%. Let's say. However, you can also define a bill factor for the VAT uh, linked to a characteristic. Maybe this characteristic is the business type. Okay, so if business type, you can define the business type for residential is 5%, for uh, commercial is 20%. And based on the account characteristic for each customer, they could have a characteristic called business type. And if that is residential, it will apply 5% dynamically. And and what is more important is the characteristic can carry different values over time. And also on this is how the bill factor value price can change over time. But over to the characteristic on the account, maybe the customer change from residential to commercial this year. So when the bill is applied, it will automatically apply 20% for the new year. So this makes these things very dynamic and can actually understand how the prices should be applied and also correctly aligned with the customer information. Okay, so this is this is one of the feature of billing in CCMB, and that is making a lot of difference and making things much easier because you never uh, predict what happens with you can configure, well, you have to configure the bill factor values, right? Because if there's a price change, you have to configure it. But you don't know sometimes how the customer data um, get updated. Maybe some of the bill is based on the customer location, based on their region, but the address could change, and that's not necessarily through the C2M. Maybe their location is kind of updated from an external CRM system. So if you want this kind of control of the price to make sure it apply at the right time to the right customer, then this is the best usage of bill factor. Over here, we're saying when to use bill factor. So given what we said up there, you can see it can, if the amount is same on the multiple rates, if the amount change independent of the rate, if they differ from the customer defined in the service agreement, um, the amount applicability is defined in the service agreement. The customer may be exempt from portion of charge. All of these are possible because the bill factor can have multiple values defined on characteristics. Okay, so bottom line, bill factors are used when amount of charge to is declared external from rate component. Okay, let's look at one example. Since we have already talked about the rate and the bill factor, let's look at how a real scenario actually constructs with these elements. So over here we look at I would say relatively simple case. Okay, so we have a fixed price contract for 1 year, standing charge, unit charge, and VAT. Okay, so these are the simple components. Standing charge on the daily basis, and the same for all customers. Price can change monthly. Okay, uh, and the unit charge fixed for contract period and agreed per customer basis. So, where should we start? So we will imagine we will apply. Let's say we have one rate schedule. Let's call it residential 1 year fixed. Okay, and then we make it simple, one version. Okay, one version. Now, how many rate components do we need? I think we need four. Because the first one we need to calculate unit charge. Second, we need to calculate standing charge. Both of these are based on the service quantity. Okay, it's only the unit charge service quantity is not coming from bill factor because it's agreed with customer upfront. Normally, where we store that on the service agreement contract terms. And if you are familiar with how service agreement works, you know that is place normally we keep the contract values. Okay. Second, where the standing charge is stored because it is generic for all the customers and it could change over time. We will have a bill factor called residential standing charge, and that will be applied when we calculate the standing charge. Third one is a summary of the total charge. We use the summary rate component. Last one, we basically use the apply to rate component to calculate the VAT, apply the VAT rate, defining the bill factor to the summary rate component calculation result. Okay, so it looks really simple, and this actually links up all the components on a very high level. how we can utilize these um, components to construct a bill rate calculation. Okay, so at last, um, I would like to expand a little bit on the data model. So I think for people who haven't really worked on the service agreement or rate before, it will take time for you to get familiar with it. But most importantly, what I want to say is if we look at the entity diagram here, today we talk about a rate schedule, rate version, rate component. Right in the middle, you can see that. Now, rate schedule is defined on um, the service agreement, as we mentioned. It links to a rate schedule, and when the bill segment is created based on the service agreement, each bill segment calculation header is linked to a rate version, and the bill segment calculation line is linked to a rate component. Okay, so from the left, SA can have different rates over time, but only one is used to calculate a given bill segment. Okay, the resultant bill segment has one or more bill calculation header. Multiple bill calculation header may be created if multiple rate versions are effective during the billing period. It depends on how the rate schedule is configured. Okay. Um, that is true. That is very true because rate version could change. We need to be very careful about that. But rate version doesn't change that often unless you are configuring the rule differently. So in a production environment, we don't really change the rate version that often. But in terms of the price change, that's all handled within the bill factor. So that is also why the bill factor we said any price changes should happen there, but any logic change should happen in the bill uh, in the in the rate version. Okay, so uh, the logic doesn't change that often, but price does change very often. This is something I think in the next session we will expand it and look at more details. Now, last, a bill line exists for most of the rate components, and it contains a snapshot of the calculation and how the printed bill line will look like. Right, so this is everything we talked today. Okay, thank you. So, any questions, let me know. And I think for the next session, we will look a bit more into details. But hopefully, today you have the idea of how a rate works in C2M. Thank you. See you next time.